The next storyteller, this is her second time here at Tell Me Story, and we're very excited to have her back again. Please make welcome to the stage in the warmest possible way, Mrs. Helen Townsend.
I love the missus. I'm not available, yeah. My story starts when I was 7 years old, and that puts it well back in the 1950s. And it was Christmas holidays, and my family had decided to spend the Christmas holidays, or the week of Christmas, at the Snowy Mountains. And the reason we were going was we were going to see that wonder of post-war development, the Snowy Mountain schemes. We were going to see those towering walls of concrete. We were going to see the tunnels going through mountains. We were going to see the electricity stations. And this was, of course, all before progress became a dirty word in Australia. So we set off on this journey, and 4 kids in our family, and we were driving a Citroen. Not a Holden, we were driving a Citroen. And the reason we were driving this Citroen was because my father was in love with it. It was an old Citroen, he'd had it for a long time, and the fact that he had 4 children was not going to put him off. It was a small car, so we had 3 kids wedged in the back, me and my 2 older siblings. In the front, my mother sat, and she had the baby in a basket under her feet. And in the same basket, she had a whole lot of apples. And whenever the back seat got rowdy, she'd peel a few apples and pass them over. And my father, of course, was driving. We had an enormous amount of luggage under a tarp on the top. And in the back, we had our Christmas presents, because we were spending Christmas down there. But most important, we had the veggies for the Christmas dinner. We had the cauliflower, which was going to be cauliflower sauce, and the potatoes, which were going to be baked potatoes, and the parsnip and the mashed pumpkin and the beans, all those things that are essential for Christmas dinner. So on the afternoon before Christmas, we're on our last leg of our journey. My father's rented a cottage in Smiggin Holes, and the roads then weren't like they are now. They weren't like the skiing superhighways. They were dirt tracks, basically. So we're going along in the Citroen in these dirt tracks, looking forward to getting there. And my father says, "Shush, kids. Quiet, quiet, quiet. I think I hear a knock in the engine." And my mother says, "There's no knock in the engine, because we've been down this path before." We've been down this path before. There is no knock in the engine. And we drive on a bit further, and my father says, "Well, I can hear it." And my mother says, "Alan, stop this. It's perfectly all right. There is no knock in the engine." Now, you might think at this point that really sums up the subject. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But my mother had an extended view of this little proverb. She thought that when my father started saying there's a knock in the engine, he was actually encouraging the Citroen to break down. And she also thought that he was doing it to annoy her, which was partly true, because he'd say there's a knock in the engine and wait for this. "Alan, stop that." And she said at this point, "Well, we can't stop and look at your engine because we have to get to Smiggin by 5 o'clock. The butcher is waiting for us with our leg of pork. And what would all these vegetables in the back be like if we didn't have a leg of pork for Christmas? It's the penultimate part of the Christmas dinner." He's saying, "Well, we've got to stop," and she's saying, no, don't encourage the Citroen to break down." But we're going along one of these stony roads, and we start going up a hill, and the Citroen actually does start making the noise, pa-chunkata, pa-chunkata, pa-chunkata. My mother's saying, "We've got to get to Smiggin by 5 o'clock, pork roast." However, the Citroen stops, and it's on the hill, and we're sort of basically next to a cliff, And my father gets out and he looks under the bonnet and he looks under the car. And just as he's doing that, this Snowy Mountain Authority truck roars up the hill, and it's full of blokes in the back. And they roar up the hill and we sort of wave and they sort of wave. They get to the top of the hill and they stop. And they look round and they yell, "Citroën! Citroën!" And as fast as they had come up the hill, they back down the hill and stop next to us. And all these guys jump out and they're speaking in this exotic foreign language. They've all got Slavic dark good looks, and they are madly excited about seeing a Citroën rather than a Holden, which presumably they'd seen a lot of. So this car was from Europe like them. We were just stunned. We had never met people who spoke foreign languages, especially so fast. We had never met people who looked like this and who were so excited about a car, and we were basically your white-bread Anglo-Celts, and we didn't have much knowledge of foreigners, which these people obviously were. However, they established a sort of communion with my dad, you know, sort of male bonding which overcame language, and they had this love object, the Citroën, between them. And so they looked around and they couldn't get it going, so they got a big tow rope out and they attached us to the truck, and my mother said, "Thank God, they're taking us to Smiggen Holes. We can get to the butcher by 5. A little further up the mountain, my father said, "Well, actually, we're going to G High Walls," which is a long way. And she said, "Well, just as long as we get back to Smiggen, because we can't go without the roast pork, etc., etc., etc." So we get up to G High Walls where the camp is, and it's fantastic. It's all these canvas tents, big canvas tents, a big mess hall, and more of these men, and a great big gravel circle outside, these trucks and heavy machinery, and more men, and evidently the ace mechanic. And these guys get to work on the car. Meanwhile, these are men who've come from Europe, especially to work on the Snowy Mountains scheme, and they have left behind wives and children. Well, my mother, standing there with her arms crossed, obviously wasn't going to be the substitute wife. But we kids had a fabulous time. It was so good. They taught us to play soccer, they gave us piggyback rides, and they were just absolutely thrilled to see these kids, you know, toss the baby up in the air, and it was just wonderful. It was so exotic because there was no language between us, no language at all. Anyway, 5 o'clock passes and my mother's looking very grim, but she's sort of resigned to just having vegetables for Christmas dinner, which was a loaded statement. But we were there, and then it gets dark and they gave us dinner, and they gave us salami, not Devon, they gave us salami and they gave us pickles and some very exotic things we couldn't even identify. And my mother was looking askance at this, and the men are still under torchlight looking at this Citroën. And it gets later and later and darker, and it's very exciting for kids because these men are still playing with us, interested in us and teaching us things, and we were having a wonderful time just with the exotica of it. Finally, the ace mechanic gets in the car and it goes. And my father gets in beside him and the guys start to push it. And my father says, "Well, we'll just try it out round this big circle of gravel." Well, they didn't just try it out. It was like a bloody Grand Prix. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And then when the mechanic had a go, about 5 other people wanted to have a go. So it was going round and round, and they were yahooing and they were having a fabulous time. And, of course, by this time it was totally pitch dark, and we have to find our way back to Smiggen on this gravelled road, not really knowing where we are, the signs not terribly good, and dodging kangaroos and wombats and various other critters. And so we're driving through the dark, and my father says, forgot something. I was supposed to pick up the key from the newsagent at 5 o'clock for the cottage. And I don't know where the cottage is really. And we thought, we'll be sleeping in the car all night. And my mother was saying, well, see. So we had not only had we relinquished the leg of pork, we had also nowhere to stay. And finally we're lost, and then we're found, and finally we see this light and we think, that's Smiggin. And it's after midnight at this time, and we drive up the road and into the little village of Smiggin, nothing like it is now, very small, very modest, very run down. And at the end of the street is a wooden church, and out of that church is the sound of people singing and midnight mass. Midnight mass, Christmas Eve. And my father, who was quite shy, said, Jeannie, you go up there and see if you can find someone to get the key. And so my mother gets out of the car and she starts running, and we three older kids, we get out of the car, the baby's still in the basket of apples asleep, and we get out of the car and we run up behind her, and she grabs some woman and she says, where is the butcher? And the woman says, oh, Stan, he's over there. And she runs over to Stan and she says, leg of pork. And he says, Mrs. Mac. So there's this instant communion. And then we all run down to the butcher's shop. She gives him the money and he hands her the leg of pork, which she embraces as if it was the baby Jesus. And then Stan, fortunately, knows the man who knows the man who knows where the key is, who knows where the house is. And we kids collapse on the floor of the house and go to sleep. We're so tired. And next day we have the most fabulous leg of pork with cauliflower cheese and baked potatoes and baked parsnips and mashed pumpkin and beans and a Christmas pudding. And we are all very, very, very happy. And then we have a wonderful time in the snowy, seeing these tunnels going through the mountain and the damming of the river and the lakes, and we even see snow, which for we kids is really the most exciting part. And so we have this wonderful week down there. Tension between my parents is perhaps a little less than usual, this having panned out quite well. And then we pack up and we put all the things on top of the car, and my mother gets more apples to put in the basket. And we're halfway back to Cooma, and my father says to us in the back, shh, shh. Then he says, I think there's a knock in the engine. And my mother says to him, Alan, don't you dare.
My friend, Helen Townsend.